The October sun poured over the Blackwood Mansion's terraced gardens, gilding the marble columns and perfectly manicured hedges in a honeyed glow. The outdoor dining table gleamed under the light, polished to a mirror-like shine, and set with crystal glasses, gleaming silverware, and floral arrangements so meticulously arranged they seemed more art than decoration. Around it sat 15 of California's most powerful businessmen, suits crisp, shoes gleaming, and expressions carefully neutral. They had come expecting an afternoon of negotiations, strategic discussions, and perhaps the occasional veiled power play. What they had not expected was the tiny cyclone that was Tommy Blackwood. The one-year-old's wails shredded the calm like knives through silk. His red face contorted with fury, tiny fists battering the air as though striking invisible enemies. Drooling tears mingled on chubby cheeks, his cries bouncing off the marble surfaces, ricocheting into every corner of the meticulously curated lawn. Chairs scraped against stone as executives shifted uncomfortably, unease rippling through the gathering. Some attempted polite coughs to mask their irritation, while others subtly tried to glance toward the estate's grand infinity pool, hoping to focus elsewhere. At the head of the table, Richard Blackwood sat frozen, a polished hand resting on the edge of the mahogany surface as his jaw clenched tightly. In any boardroom in the world, Richard was a titan, a man who could negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions without breaking a sweat, a CEO whose name alone carried weight, and a strategist whose instincts were feared and respected across the country. Yet here, in the face of his own son's relentless fury, he was stripped bare of authority, his confidence evaporating into the autumn air along with the echoes of Tommy's screams. Richard's mind raced. 6 months ago, Elena had left without warning, leaving behind a note that read simply, "I can't do this anymore." Since that day, the mansion had become a fortress of cold elegance, its silence broken only by Tommy's frustrated screams. Nannies had come and gone like shadows, unable to decipher the code of the boy's relentless anger. Pediatric specialists had been summoned, sleep consultants flown in, yet nothing had worked. The house, rich with the finest toys, the softest blankets, and the most attentive staff, seemed incapable of pacifying the child who now thrashed before them. Margaret Chen, the board's treasurer, dabbed delicately at her brow with a linen napkin, the sun turning her cheeks pink. "Perhaps we should postpone the meeting," she murmured, her voice low but firm, trying to offer a solution that didn't exist. Others nodded subtly, shifting uneasily in their tailored suits, eyes flicking between Richard and the infant, as though watching a live experiment in futility. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he reached forward, a gesture meant to calm, meant to reclaim some fragment of paternal authority. Tommy's reaction was immediate, a shriek louder, sharper, and more feral than before. The boardroom, once a sanctuary of control, had become a theater of helplessness. The clash between wealth and human unpredictability was laid bare. Billions of dollars and titles counted for nothing in the presence of raw, unbridled emotion. The tension was palpable. The other men and women at the table, accustomed to commanding industries and dictating markets, were powerless in the face of a tiny human who demanded attention on his own terms. Their polite smiles and nods could not mask the creeping dread that perhaps some things could not be bought or solved with strategy. As the autumn sun cast its golden light over the chaos, one truth shimmered starkly. Richard Blackwood, master of empires, was utterly helpless to soothe his own son, and the question that haunted everyone present remained unspoken. Why would Tommy reject everyone? And more pressing still, why had every capable, trained caregiver failed to calm him? The answer, it seemed, waited silently just beyond the polished table, in a corner of the garden where the afternoon sunlight softened and shadows gathered, a secret yet to step forward, yet destined to transform this perfect chaos. Maya Rodriguez crouched at the edge of the infinity pool, her small hands gripping the handle of a worn net as she scooped up fallen leaves, one after another as if performing a secret ritual. The water glimmered with golden reflections of the autumn sun, its surface disturbed only by the occasional ripple of her careful movements. Around her, the Blackwood mansion sprawled like a city unto itself. Towers of marble, trimmed hedges, fountains that sang with precise water jets. But for Maya, none of it mattered. The chaos unfolding on the outdoor dining table drew her attention like a magnet, and yet she remained unseen, a ghost among the giants of wealth and power. Her dark eyes, Alert and searching reflected the raw, high-pitched wails that carried across the garden. Tommy. That was the sound of desperation, of a child's voice reaching out through a world that had grown cold and indifferent. Maya had heard it before. Her own sobs had once pierced the night of her cramped apartment when her father left, when she was only 4. Back then, she had learned quickly how to cry silently, to keep the pain tucked away, to survive by observing rather than interfering. But this was different. Listening to Tommy's screams made her heart ache as if it were her own. She studied the adults frozen around the table, men and women of prestige and sharp suits, faces twisted in polite discomfort or thinly veiled irritation. They whispered to one another in murmurs that floated faintly over the air, trading glances heavy with judgment and confusion. None of them understood. They had everything, a mansion, servants, the power to bend industries, but they could not calm a child. And Maya, despite her youth, despite her poverty, understood exactly what was needed. Maya's gaze flicked to Richard Blackwood. The man was a paradox, a giant in the corporate world yet shrunken in the presence of his own child. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for Tommy, a gesture both desperate and hesitant. His face was a mask of frustration, exhaustion, and something that Maya recognized immediately. Love desperately seeking a way to reach a heart that was barricaded behind fear and pain. Even from a distance, she could see how hollowed he looked, how his wealth and power were useless against the storm of emotion unfolding in front of him. And then, something unexpected happened. A hush fell over the garden, subtle but palpable. The other board members leaned back in their chairs, eyebrows knit, sensing a shift. Maya felt it too. A quiet, almost imperceptible energy moving through the air as if the universe itself paused, waiting for a choice to be made. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin and the cool stone beneath her sandals, and made her decision. She rose slowly, deliberately, her small figure threading its way across the garden with a grace that belied her age. Each step was silent, careful, almost ritualistic. Her heart thudded with both fear and resolve. The boardroom was a world she did not belong to. It was a place of giants and unspoken rules. Yet she was moving toward the epicenter of the storm, the screaming, red-faced, helpless boy who needed someone to see him, to understand him. Maya carried with her a bottle she had prepared in secret, warmed just so, the milk swirling faintly in the sunlight. It was an ordinary object, yet in her hands it was a talisman, a tool of quiet magic that might bridge worlds, between child and parent, between wealth and humility, between despair and hope. No one at the table noticed her approach. They were too enraptured by the spectacle of the billionaire father failing, the chaos of privilege unraveling before their eyes. And then, a single movement caught Richard's attention. A small shadow crossing the garden, deliberate, unwavering. His gaze followed it, first with confusion, then with a flicker of disbelief. Who was this? How dare she come forward, a child in his domain? And yet something in her calm, unwavering steps drew him out of his paralysis, forcing him to acknowledge what he had long ignored, that the answers he sought, the peace he craved for his son, might not be found in wealth, authority, or strategy, but in the quiet courage of a child no one had noticed until now. Maya stopped a mere foot away from the table. She looked up, met Richard's wide, disbelieving eyes, and whispered, almost as if speaking into a sacred secret, "May I try something?" The words were simple. The moment was infinite. And in that instant, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The screaming, the wealth, the polished marble, the gazes of the most powerful men and women in California, all of it faded into the background. What mattered was a 7-year-old girl, a baby, and the fragile, unspoken promise of hope that hung between them like a taut string, ready to vibrate with change. The murmurs of the boardroom fell into a tense, suspended silence as Maya's small hand extended toward Tommy, the bottle cradled gently against her chest. Time seemed to stretch. The air, thick with sun and the faint scent of roses from the garden, held its breath, as though nature itself waited for the next heartbeat to determine the course of events. Richard Blackwood's mind raced, a torrent of thoughts and instincts colliding. Authority, wealth, and power had always been his allies, yet none of them applied here. He could command empires, manipulate markets, and negotiate billion-dollar deals in his sleep. But this tiny human, a 1-year-old wrapped in fury and confusion, rendered all that irrelevant. The executives around him, the men and women whose approval could make or break companies, sat rigid, frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Some shifted, uncomfortable in the luxury of their own impotence, realizing that they were witnessing something that money could not influence, control, or fix. "Sir, may I?" Maya's voice was soft, almost ethereal, yet it carried a weight that belied her age. The syllables seemed to hover in the golden air, refusing to dissipate. Richard opened his mouth to protest, to assert his authority, but words failed him. A voice inside whispered a truth he had long ignored. "Maybe someone outside your world of privilege can see what you cannot." Maya stepped forward. Her sandals whispered against the warm stone, a sound so delicate it almost seemed ceremonial. Tommy's cries pierced the air, sharper, more desperate, as if he sensed that salvation or disaster might arrive in the same instant. His little fists banged against the polished mahogany, eyes wild and fearful, searching faces that offered only frustration or polite discomfort. And yet when Maya approached, something shifted. She did not reach for him like the nannies had, all clinical efficiency and hands full of expensive toys. She did not coo in mechanical tones or dangle plastic distractions. She moved with the confidence of someone who had seen pain, known it intimately, and chosen not to fear it. Her small hands hovered near his arms, soft, tentative, yet determined. She whispered gently, a Spanish lullaby her grandmother had sung to her, the words unfamiliar to all around except for the baby's instinctive recognition. Tommy's screams faltered, a hiccup, a pause, as if his ears had caught a frequency he had long been searching for but never found. His fists, once furious and relentless, stilled, hovering in the air like hesitating sparks before a fire. The board members exchanged bewildered glances, their polished veneers cracking under the pressure of a child's simple trust. Richard's chest tightened. He could feel something unfamiliar, a hope fragile and trembling, blooming where despair had taken root for months. Maya lifted the bottle with careful precision, the warm milk sloshing softly, a tangible symbol of comfort she had prepared in secret. She guided it toward Tommy's lips, and he latched on instinctively, greedily. The screams that had pierced the mansion now faltered, a weak whimper and then a curious, trusting gaze that locked onto Maya's face. His blue eyes, bright, alert, wary, and yet already softening, studied her as if searching for the proof that kindness could exist beyond the walls of the mansion he had come to distrust. Richard exhaled, a long, shaky breath he had not realized he was holding. The transformation was immediate, almost magical. Board members leaned forward, some eyes wide, some secretly relieved that their impeccable reputations were not entirely stained by helplessness. The baby, once a tempest of rage, was now calm, drinking and blinking up at the tiny girl who had somehow transcended every barrier they had thought invincible. Age, class, and status. Margaret Chen, who had seen every conceivable high-stakes disaster in her 30 years of corporate life, could not hide the astonishment creeping into her eyes. Her gaze, like Richard's, was locked not on the baby but on the child who had achieved what they all could not. Maya hummed the lullaby again, tilting her head slightly, small fingers brushing Tommy's soft hair. The effect was immediate. Eyelids drooped, tiny hands relaxed, and for the first time in months, Richard saw the baby surrender to comfort rather than fury. And then, almost imperceptibly, the tension shifted in the garden. The air that had been taut with embarrassment, frustration, and societal expectation now shimmered with quiet awe. The mansion, the boardroom, the empire itself, all of it faded into irrelevance against the simplest, most powerful force Richard had ever witnessed: the intuition, courage, and love of a 7-year-old girl. The question that had haunted him for months rose again, but now with a new weight. Why had no one else seen this? Richard's hands, still trembling, hovered over Tommy. He wanted to intervene, to reclaim authority, but a deeper instinct stopped him. This miracle was not his to control. He could only watch, humbled, as the impossible unfolded before him. The garden air felt different now, charged with a strange, fragile electricity. The golden autumn sunlight, once dazzling, seemed softer, warmer, as though it recognized the miracle occurring beneath it. Tommy's tiny hands, once flailing and striking the air with furious determination, rested on Maya's small forearm, clutching for support in a gesture that was almost reverent. His cries, once relentless and savage, had softened into murmurs, a series of hesitant, searching sounds as if he were testing the reality of calmness for the first time in his short life. Richard Blackwood remained frozen in his chair at the head of the polished table, eyes wide, a hand gripping the edge so tightly that the marble beneath his fingers creaked faintly. His mind, trained to calculate risk, strategy, and outcome in milliseconds, struggled to comprehend what he was witnessing. All his power, all his wealth, all the resources at his disposal had failed to reach Tommy. Yet here, in the hands of a 7-year-old girl who had never asked for recognition, the boy was calm. More than calm, he was mesmerized. He looked at Maya with a trust and curiosity that Richard had not seen directed at any human being, including himself. The board members, previously tense and uncomfortable, were now silently captivated. Some leaned forward, instinctively drawn into the spectacle. The air was thick with disbelief and unspoken questions. How could a child, a mere girl, perform a feat that the combined efforts of nannies, specialists, and consultants had failed to achieve? Every polished executive, every carefully trained professional, was rendered powerless in comparison to Maya's quiet authority. It was as though she commanded a power invisible to wealth and experience, a force rooted in empathy, instinct, and unshakable courage. Tommy's blue eyes, wide and glistening, followed every subtle movement of Maya's small hands. She tilted the bottle just slightly, adjusting the flow of milk as if she were negotiating with him, not commanding him. The boy responded instantly, leaning closer, his tiny mouth opening eagerly. His cries ceased entirely, replaced by the soft, rhythmic suckling that filled the hushed garden like a hymn. The sound was almost surreal, a lullaby for those watching, a hymn that spoke of innocence, compassion, and the impossible bridge between despair and hope. Richard's chest tightened. A mix of awe, relief, and a painful sting of humility swept over him. He had spent months throwing money, expertise, and authority at the problem, and yet it had been a small, unseen girl who held the answer. The realization cut deeper than any insult or failed deal. He had been blind, relying on power instead of presence, strategy instead of empathy. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless in a way that mattered, and then the first laugh came. A soft, tentative sound, almost a whisper, escaped Tommy's lips as he glimpsed Maya's face. It was a laugh full of wonder, of discovery, of the fragile joy that comes when fear is finally met with understanding. The sound echoed faintly across the garden, ricocheting off marble and stone, carrying with it the first true warmth that the Blackwood mansion had known in months. Richard exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that released some fraction of the tension he had carried. The other adults in the room shifted, some exchanging uncertain glances, others staring in open astonishment. Margaret Chen's lips parted slightly, disbelief etched into every line of her face. In 30 years of corporate life, she had seen power, ambition, wealth, and manipulation, but she had never seen the raw, transformative force of simple human connection on display with such undeniable clarity. For Maya, the moment was effortless. She hummed the lullaby again, a soft, melodic cadence that threaded through the hum of distant conversations, the splashing of the pool, the rustle of autumn leaves. Tommy's eyelids grew heavy, his body relaxing completely into her small arms, a stark contrast to the frantic thrashing of minutes before. He was no longer a storm but a calm sea, a fragile vessel resting on the current of someone else's steady, unshakable hands. Richard's mind raced. He understood now that the walls he had built, around Tommy, around himself, around the empire, could not withstand the purity of this connection. He wanted to reach out, to intervene, to reclaim the role of father, but something deeper held him back. Maya's presence was not intrusion. It was revelation. She had unlocked a truth he had been blind to. Love, empathy, and understanding could not be bought, coerced, or controlled. They could only be given freely, quietly, courageously, and received in their own time. The boardroom, once a theater of power, had transformed into a witness of the impossible. Eyes followed Maya, whispers held their breath, and the mansion itself seemed to lean closer, eager to witness the miracle unfolding. And as Tommy drifted into the first peaceful sleep he had known in months, Richard felt a shift deep inside him, a mixture of reverence, gratitude, and a trembling realization that nothing in his world would ever be the same again. The question remained, unspoken but heavier than ever. Who was this girl? And how had she become the one person capable of reshaping not only his son's world, but perhaps the Blackwood Empire itself? The golden afternoon had begun to fade, and the long shadows of the Blackwood mansion stretched across the garden like silent sentinels. Tommy slept peacefully in Maya's arms, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm, oblivious to the ripple of unease spreading through the assembled adults. The board members, once captivated by the miracle of the moment, now shifted uncomfortably, their glances heavy with judgment, envy, and the subtle panic of social propriety breached. Richard Blackwood remained rooted near the table, torn between awe and apprehension. He had witnessed what no amount of money, authority, or strategy could achieve, yet the very thing that saved his son had awakened a new storm. Society's invisible gaze, once comfortably distant, now pressed against him, sharp and unforgiving. The whispers of his peers, the subtle smirks exchanged among wealthy acquaintances, the unspoken critique of a child, of a poor, unnoticed child, raising his heir, all pressed against the walls of his meticulously curated world. "Sir," came a quiet, measured voice from the edge of the garden. Sofia Rodriguez, Maya's mother and the mansion's head housekeeper, approached hesitantly, her hands clasped in front of her, knuckles white beneath the crisp uniform. "We need to talk." Richard's stomach tightened. He had anticipated confrontation from the corporate world, from the board, even from the whispers of the staff. But now it came from her, the one person who had nurtured the miracle before it was seen. "What is it?" His voice was steady, but a tremor betrayed the tension coiling in his chest. Sophia's eyes flicked to Tommy, still cradled in Maya's small arms, and back to Richard. "People are talking, sir. Your neighbors, the staff, friends you've invited over. Some are already questioning the arrangement." She swallowed, her lips pressed in a thin line. "They don't understand that Maya isn't just playing with him. They don't see what she's done. And if they do, well, they'll judge." Richard ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. The mansion, once a sanctuary of control and perfection, now felt fragile, exposed. He could hear the faint echo of Charles Morrison's last weekend comment, the casual cruelty disguised as humor. "Heard you've got a little Mexican girl raising your boy now." Quite the turn of events for the Blackwood heir. The words had seemed distant then, almost laughable, but now they cut sharper, their truth pressing against the delicate miracle in his garden. "I don't care what they think," Richard said quietly, almost to himself. His gaze fell on Maya, still humming softly, her small voice threading a lullaby around Tommy's slumber. "Do you understand that, Sophia? I don't care. My son needs this." Sophia's expression softened, but concern lingered. "I know, sir, I do. But people will not see it as you do. They will question you, judge you, perhaps even try to take her away. She paused, as though choosing her next words with care. "I want you to be prepared. For them, for the whispers, for the consequences." Richard's mind raced, calculating the risks, weighing the judgment of society against the newfound peace of his child. For months he had chased control, nannies, consultants, sleep specialists. But now he realized control was not the goal. Connection was. Love was. Maya had opened a door he did not know existed. And for the first time, he feared not the collapse of his empire, but the threat of losing this fragile bond. Meanwhile, murmurs had already begun among the staff. A discreet glance from a housekeeper, a hesitant comment in the kitchen, the faint ripple of curiosity and envy. They all sensed the shift, the quiet upheaval that Maya represented. She was small, poor, and yet more powerful than any of them in the only arena that mattered, the heart of the Blackwood heir. Richard straightened, inhaling the autumn air deep into his lungs, feeling the tension in every muscle. "No," he said, his voice low but firm. I will not take this from him, she stays. Tommy deserves this no matter the consequences. Sophia nodded slowly, relief and apprehension mingling in her expression. I understand, sir. But you must be ready. The world will test this. They always test what they cannot understand. As Richard watched, Maya shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket over Tommy and humming again. The golden light of sunset caught in her dark hair, a halo of defiance and hope. Richard realized, with a sharp pang, that the world outside this garden, laws, money, status, judgment, was powerless here. And yet he could feel the storm brewing just beyond the gates, waiting to challenge this small miracle. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet promise settled in him. No one, not the elite, not the world, not even his own fears, would take this from Tommy. Not now, not ever. And as he looked at Maya, he understood something profound. This was more than a moment. This was a reckoning. The question hung in the air like the first chill of winter. How far will they go to test what they cannot understand? The mansion's halls, usually polished and silent, now echoed faintly with the soft patter of small feet. Tommy had begun to anticipate Maya's arrival each afternoon, rushing to the service entrance as if guided by instinct. Richard watched from his office window, a mixture of fascination, relief, and unease twisting inside him. For months he had lived in a world defined by schedules, board meetings, and financial empires. Now he found himself counting the minutes until a 7-year-old girl arrived with a bottle and a song, a presence far more powerful than any boardroom negotiation. Maya's influence on Tommy was undeniable. He laughed now, a high, bubbling sound that ricocheted off marble walls and manicured hedges, filling spaces that had long been hollowed by absence and neglect. Toys lay forgotten. Meals were eaten with newfound curiosity, and sleep came not in frantic bursts but in long stretches that allowed Richard himself to breathe, to rest, to notice the fragility of what had nearly been lost. Every evening, as he walked through the sun-dappled corridors of the mansion, he caught glimpses of them. Maya cradling Tommy with unshakable patience, her lullaby weaving invisible threads through the air, binding two lives together in a quiet, unstoppable force. But as peace settled over the mansion, shadows gathered elsewhere. Whispers traveled along polished marble floors and up ornate staircases. Housekeepers and ground staff exchanged cautious glances, the tension of class and proximity simmering quietly. "Have you noticed how the boy only smiles for her?" one whispered in the kitchen. Another nodded, a frown creasing her forehead. "It's unusual. Shouldn't someone, I don't know, supervise this?" Their words carried no malice, only the uneasy murmur of those unaccustomed to seeing power challenged, not by adults but by a child. Even outside the mansion, the elite were beginning to notice. Invitations to clubs, casual brunches, and social gatherings carried a whisper. The Blackwoods air was being influenced, shaped, even raised, by a girl of no social standing, a child who had nothing, and yet somehow commanded everything that mattered. Comments, veiled or cruel, began to find their way to Richard's ears, each one a subtle barb threatening the delicate ecosystem he had allowed to flourish in the garden. Richard wrestled with this reality in silence, pacing the corridors late into the night. On one hand, the connection between Maya and Tommy was miraculous, irreplaceable, and entirely beyond money or power. On the other, the world outside, the one he had mastered, the one that defined his identity, would not easily accept such defiance. He understood, with an aching certainty, that sooner or later someone would try to test this fragile bond, to undermine it, to force a choice between conformity and the miracle that now guided his son's life. Amid this rising tension, subtle hints of Maya's past began to emerge. She had an uncanny sense of timing, always appearing when Tommy's agitation peaked, always knowing the precise pitch, the perfect movement, the exact rhythm of care he needed. Richard noticed her watching him sometimes, those wide, dark eyes, filled with an understanding that startled him, as if she knew more than she should. He recalled Elena's old caretaker stories, whispers of women who had guided children, of traditions passed quietly, invisibly, from generation to generation. He wondered, uneasily, if Maya's gift was more than instinct, more than compassion. Something ancient, precise, threaded through her actions, something that hinted at secrets buried deep in the shadows of the Blackwood legacy itself. One evening, as the sun sank low and the mansion glowed in fire-orange light, Richard stepped onto the terrace where Maya sat swinging Tommy gently, humming her familiar lullaby. He observed her, his chest tight, a strange mixture of gratitude and trepidation swelling within him. The power dynamics of his world, the wealth, the titles, the boardrooms, felt fragile, almost laughably insignificant. Here, a child held sway not only over his son but over him, over the rhythms of the home, over the unspoken moral gravity of what it meant to parent, to care, to nurture. And yet the question gnawed at him. Who was this girl, truly? How could someone so small, so young, wield a force he could neither predict nor control? The mansion, silent around them except for the soft cooing of the boy, seemed to lean closer, as if it too were listening, waiting for the answer. Richard realized with a shiver that traveled down his spine that the coming days would not only test the bond between Maya and Tommy, but also his own understanding of legacy, of love, and of power. Somewhere in the shadows of this golden mansion, the threads of the past were moving, weaving toward a revelation that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about family, inheritance, and the invisible forces that truly shaped the human heart. For now, though he remained silent, watching and wondering just how far this small, extraordinary girl would reach, and whether the world outside the garden would ever forgive him for letting her hold so much of what mattered most. The late afternoon sunlight spilled across the Blackwood mansion, casting long shadows that danced across the marble floors and ornate columns, as if the house itself held its breath. Richard stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching Maya gently place Tommy on a soft blanket near the fountain, her small hands steady and deliberate, her humming threading through the air like invisible magic. Tommy's blue eyes sparkled with delight, his laughter carrying through the garden, a sound that had once seemed impossible to conjure. For months, Richard had watched in awe and quiet fear as this small girl, with nothing but a warm bottle and her voice, had undone all the walls he had built around his son's life. He had come to rely on her, to trust her instinct, and to marvel at the effortless way she navigated the fragile currents of his son's emotions. Yet a question had been gnawing at him, an unease he could no longer ignore. Who was this child? How could she know so intuitively, so instinctively exactly what Tommy needed when even the finest caregivers, armed with decades of experience, had failed? Sophia, Maya's mother, approached cautiously, her expression taut with worry. "Sir, there's something you need to know," she said quietly, her eyes flicking toward her daughter who hummed softly, oblivious to the tension now thickening the air. "It's about Maya's grandmother, and Elena." Richard's heart skipped a beat. Elena, his wife, the mother who had walked out months ago without a word, leaving only silence and a note behind. He turned fully to Sophia, every instinct in him screaming to brace for revelation, for some truth long buried in the shadows of his family's history. Sophia inhaled, steadying herself. "Your wife trusted my mother, Maya's grandmother, with Tommy when he was born. She was the one who taught Maya everything she knows about caring for children like him, not just feeding or soothing. She taught her how to see the world through their eyes, to understand their hearts. Your son isn't just calmed by her presence. He's calmed because Maya carries a piece of the care your wife entrusted to someone she trusted completely." Richard felt the floor tilt beneath him. His mind raced, a chaotic storm of disbelief, awe, and a creeping sense of destiny. It was impossible, improbable, almost fantastical. And yet, as he looked at Maya, kneeling with Tommy, adjusting his tiny hand, humming a lullaby in perfect cadence, the truth could no longer be denied. This girl was not a stranger. She was the legacy of Elena's care, a bridge between the life he had lost and the life he had been unable to protect on his own. Tears stung his eyes, a rarity for the man who had spent decades mastering self-control and composure. He stepped down into the garden, the sunlight catching in his dark hair, and approached Maya slowly, careful not to break the spell. "Maya," he began, his voice thick, uncertain. Do you Do you understand what you've done? Maya looked up, dark eyes wide and innocent yet filled with quiet strength. I just did what I knew, she said softly, brushing a lock of hair from Tommy's forehead. He was scared. He needed someone to help him feel safe. Richard knelt beside her, his hand hovering above Tommy's small chest. No, Maya. This is more than that. You've saved him. You've saved me. And somehow you were always meant to. The revelation hit with a weight that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. Richard realized that wealth, power, and influence were meaningless in the face of human connection and legacy. Maya's quiet strength, born of love, training, and heritage, had accomplished what nothing else could. The empire he had built, the billions he controlled, the status he wielded, none of it mattered as much as the miracle unfolding before him. The garden, bathed in golden light, seemed to hold its breath in reverence. Tommy giggled, reaching for Maya, and she lifted him with ease, humming softly. Richard felt a transformation within himself, a shift from fear and control to trust and gratitude. The world outside, the whispers of neighbors, the judgment of elites, the ridicule of his peers was irrelevant. This small girl, with her heart larger than his mansion, had rewritten the rules of his life. And then Sophia stepped forward, her voice barely audible over the hum of the fountains. Sir, whatever happens now, know this, she belongs here. With Tommy, with this family, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because she is part of it, in ways you are only beginning to understand. Richard exhaled slowly, a rare smile breaking across his face. For the first time in months he felt complete, not in his boardrooms, not in his empire, but here in the garden, with his son and the small extraordinary girl who had changed everything. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the mansion in a golden, almost sacred light. The Blackwood Empire, with all its wealth, influence, and prestige, seemed to pale in comparison to the invisible threads of trust, love, and legacy that Maya had woven into its heart. And as Tommy laughed, reaching for her hair in unguarded joy, Richard understood a truth he would carry for the rest of his life. Some power cannot be bought. Some miracles cannot be forced, and some children, small, fearless, extraordinary, hold the key to everything worth protecting. In that moment, the mansion, the empire, and the world beyond all seemed to acknowledge it. Maya Rodriguez was no ordinary child. She was the heartbeat of a family, the keeper of a legacy, and the quiet force that had rewritten the rules of wealth. Love and destiny itself, and Richard finally knew with unwavering certainty that nothing, not fortune, not status, not fear, could ever undo what she had given them.